It's the second day of the strike by the organized labor, and we're starting to see the effect all around the country, from the national grid being shut down to hospitals complaining, workers complaining, but the organized labor determined to drive home its point. We'll be exploring what the strike is looking like in different parts of the country and what the next steps are. I'm Olive Emodi.
And I am Osaugi Ogbawa. And of course, recent news just reaching us says or shows that the organized labor may have signed an agreement with the federal government as of late last night. You know, it still, of course, has declared that the strike is still on. And of course, at the meeting that they have sometime later today, they will deliberate on whether to call the strike off or not. Of course, you know, many people have also pointed out some of the points noted in the agreement as shared by organized labor on their X or Twitter page. Showing that they have agreed, or the federal government rather has agreed to a more than 60,000 naira as a new minimum wage agreement. And of course these are some of the things we're going to be looking at today. Dashin Usman is also joining us with breakfast headlines. Good morning, Dashin.
Good morning, Osaugi. Good morning, Olive. How are you doing?
I am very well. Tell me how you're dealing with the strike. Of course, petrol scarcity across Lagos, no electricity across the country. What's your reality been like?
Oh, it's actually been, as you have said, I went home after, a long day at work yesterday, and there was no light throughout till this morning. And it was actually difficult for me to get a ride, to work this morning as well. But I was lucky. I was lucky that, I didn't have to, trek all the way from home to the office. And I'm sure this is the reality of so many people who are actually trying to find their way to work as well. That's those on essential duty, because of course, the strike has affected so many things, so many activities has been grounded. And you talked about, the government agreeing to a figure higher than 60,000 naira. What does higher mean?
It can be like 61,000.
Yeah, Olive, go ahead.
It may be like 61,000. 61,000 is higher than 60,000. I've seen reactions on X. Thankfully, I'm going to take some of these reactions. Some people have said that it's important that organized labor ensures the federal government is clear with their demands, because they don't want to ensure that they call it off now and then
come back again.
Come back to have to go through this again. So if you're pushing it through, you might as well push it through. There have been reactions to, those who say they cannot believe that organized labor will shut down the hospitals and get away scot-free with it. And I saw a particular tweet that made me chuckle. It was a very funny face of a man who had this funny expression staring blankly into the camera. And the tweet was, I think it was electricity disco workers looking in shock, knowing already that national grid was going to collapse, and staring in shock as NLC blames the national...
Faking shock.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I mean, good thing that you mentioned that, because it makes us realize that, in that agreement that was signed, nothing concerning the electricity tariff was mentioned in that agreement. And that was initially one of the things that the NLC had put forward, or rather the organized labor had put forward as one of their demands, a reduction in electricity tariff, and of course, the conversations concerning the minimum wage. But electricity tariff seems to have been ignored in
so
that
now it's
conversation.
minimum wage that just takes the cake.
Yeah, exactly. And, again, one of the things that should be, I think we should also x-ray today is, if they reach an agreement for 61,000, 70,000, 100,000, whichever one it is, none of it, I believe, can come into effect until there's a new budget, that can fund, that increment in minimum wage. I believe so. Those are some of the things.
Yes, also, who's to say that even when they come to, an agreement, that the states would be able to pay that amount? Because as it is, they find it difficult to actually pay the 30,000 naira minimum wage.
Very
even
true.
though a few of these states have decided to increase, by a few percentage, that's the salaries of their civil servants. I think just one or two.
Very true.
Yeah. So, but who is to say that these states will be able to afford the amount to even pay these workers?
Yeah, there's so many other aspects, that we can look at. And now you mentioned the states, there have been previous arguments as to states picking their own minimum wage, that they can pay. Because, of course, the IGR across different states is very different. You wouldn't expect, that a state like, Nasarawa, will be able to, would earn or pay the same amount of, with a state like River State or even Lagos, So these are things that we maybe need to fine-tune, along the lines of these discussions. But will Nigerians be disappointed with the NLC if they fold and accept an agreement of above 60,000 naira? I'm sure that many Nigerians will be disappointed. Will they, of course, continue to have these demands? Because it seems like clockwork. It's the same way it always happens. Same thing with ASU, same thing with NASU and every other body that comes to protest. You know, they reach some agreement with the government that never really gets, you know, to be taken, you know, take effect. You know, they say it's an agreement, you know, will kick off maybe at the end of the year or with the next budget cycle or whatnot. Eventually, that never happens. You hear once again of, you know, a strike being threatened by these bodies, and we go back to it again. The same thing over and over and over. But, you know, the demands have been made by Nigerians, you know, that the Nigerian government cannot say it can't afford to increase minimum wage if it has continued to increase the budget for the National Assembly every year. If it has 90 billion naira to pay for people to go, you know, for Hajj, if it has 15 billion naira to build the vice president's residence, if it has all these hundreds of billions of naira that are being wasted and moved into different MDAs every year that you never really are accounted for, then you should be able to increase the minimum wage of the average Nigerian.
And I'm hoping that they come out with a defense to that or an explanation to that or some form of a commitment to say, going forward, we're not going to sponsor religious pilgrimage, whether for the Christians or for the Muslims. Going forward, we're going to share. But honestly, Nigerians don't really see that happening.
You know, another thing that actually happened yesterday was the fact that, you know, the Senate president came out to say that, you know, they are also government workers, and, you know, it actually pushed a lot of people to the edge, and they decided to compare what, you know, civil servants actually you know, earn, and also what these senators actually earn. Civil servants are paid 30,000 naira, which ends up finishing in, like, you know, if you even try, 4 days. But, you know, these senators, they actually have allowances, wardrobe, gate man, vehicle man.
Well, they haven't even made this whole
recess allowance and everything in millions and in thousands of naira.
They haven't made this whole situation as easy as it should be. You know, the Senate is another kettle of fish that will be handled later. The National Assembly has a lot of work to do. Putting them there to revert to the old national anthem is not what Nigerians are expecting of them. But that's another conversation. Dashin, we'll have you bring us breakfast headlines. But let's share what our top stories this morning are. This morning on Breakfast Central, Labour may end strike as federal government offers above 60,000 naira. Now, they've announced that it goes on until they get some sort of a certain decision.
And also, I mean, yesterday the Labour Union shut down the national grid. It did get a lot of reactions from Nigerians.
Presidential aides attribute Labour strike to politics, it would seem.
And also remembering a fighter for democracy years after. We're talking of the late Kudirat Abiola.
And the newspaper front pages will be reviewing this morning and opening the phone lines for you to be a part of the conversation. All these and more on Breakfast Central. Now, Dashin brings you breakfast headlines.
Hello and welcome to Breakfast Headlines. I'm Darshan Usman. Now we begin the news in Nigeria's capital Abuja, where the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, George Akume, has announced that the National Tripartite Committee on Minimum Wage will meet every day for 1 week to reach an agreement. He made this known at the end of a 7-hour-long meeting with organized labor on Monday midnight. Now, Akume noted that the administration of President Bola Tinubu was committed to paying more than 60,000 naira as minimum wage. Meanwhile, the NLC and TUC will convene on Tuesday to consult their members and decide regarding the nationwide strike. Let's also tell you that in Edo State, workers have joined their counterparts across the country as part of the ongoing nationwide strike over the failure of government to increase the national minimum wage. The state government expressed shock that workers complied with the directive despite its efforts to arrest the situation by offering to pay 70,000 naira with the option of an increase when a new minimum wage is determined. Meanwhile, a civil society group, the Coalition for Credible Elections, has condemned the industrial action embarked on by the organized labor unions across the country, saying that leaders of the unions are pursuing their personal agenda. The group, while speaking to newsmen in the nation's capital, Abuja, says that efforts by the current administration to reverse the current economic situation and correct the maladministration of past governments are finally yielding results. Away from Nigeria, but still in West Africa, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited Guinea on Monday on the first leg of an African tour aimed at buttressing Moscow's influence in the continent. Russia, which has seen its relations with the West plummet after it sent troops into Ukraine in 2022, has sought to boost its influence in Africa in recent years. A Senegalese court on Monday sentenced 2 men to 3 months in jail for disinformation after they accused Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko of allegedly tolerating homosexuality. Political activist Ba Diakate and preacher Sheikh Ahmed Tidiane Ndao were each also ordered to pay a fine of 100,000 francs. Sonko had recently warned that insistence on LGBTQ rights in diplomatic relations and from multinational organizations could lead to anti-Western sentiment. In North Africa, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has reappointed Prime Minister Mustafa Al-Madbouli to form a new government after the cabinet resigned on Monday in a customary procedure after the election of a president. He directed the new government to focus on lowering inflation and regulating markets, as well as attracting and increasing local and foreign investment. The Norwegian Refugee Council says 9 African countries are among the 10 most neglected crises of mass displacement in the world. Burkina Faso tops the list for a second year amid a deepening crisis sparked by years of conflict that has left around 2 million people internally displaced. Cameroon, I beg your pardon, is in second place with Democratic Republic of Congo in third. And that's it on Breakfast Headlines. Now it's back to Osalge and Olive.
Thank you very much, Dashan, for bringing us the news this morning. We'll be bringing more updates. We'll have you again join us at 10 a.m. for the next bulletin, and we'll be reviewing some of the stories you've touched on when we look at our top stories. Yeah,
but just before, the last story that you shared about, the most ignored crisis or neglected crisis, across the world with 9 countries. You mentioned Cameroon, Democratic Republic of Congo, and a few other places. It is very true, and it just helps me or makes me wonder, if it is lack of adequate media or journalism or press freedom in these parts that have made these crises to be ignored. It says millions of people have been displaced, hundreds of thousands have been affected, thousands have lost their lives in these crises, but nobody really seems to care. It doesn't seem to make international headlines, as much as of course the ones in other parts of the world make. So I'm not sure what exactly you feel might be the cause.
Well, I think by now we should actually know that Africa is not on the top of the list, for when it comes to world power, caring about what is actually going on, in Africa. Especially, have you heard of Congo? In Congo, I think there's the crisis there is actually, something else. You have so many older people, you have so many children, you have so many young people who could actually be doing something better with their time, going into these mines, dying for a cobalt and also doing other stuff. So it's really, really sad. And it's not just Cameroon, you have other West African countries.
I mean, even in Sudan,
even
and we follow the crisis
in the Sahel, Sudan. Yes, exactly. So, this is the reason why a lot of these countries countries have been overtaken by the military, because, I think, and the people actually supporting them, especially in Niger, the people have actually gotten to a point where they feel enough is enough of people coming in, taking in what we have, and, leaving with it, but we're not really gaining much from it.
So Dashin, the cause of the crisis is not really my challenge. My worry here is
media
why
coverage.
why don't we get the same media coverage?
Well,
and I feel like...
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Well, I do think that, and I agree with you, that a number of these don't get as much coverage. We see that there's crisis happening in different parts of the world, in the Middle East, right? I think that we need more Africans to tell African stories. We need more Africans to cover our own media, to cover our own stories. Because I find that we oftentimes pander to news that's happening, or it's almost like the West is being waited for, and it's the stories that the West choose to broadcast.
But here's the thing.
Olive, I actually feel, Africa is actually covering, what is actually happening in Africa. But I think what we need is more Africans to, put in effort and put in work to make sure that these things are stopped.
No,
the crisis actually stopped.
What we don't have, in my opinion, what we don't have is...
freedom of press.
No, not that.
Okay.
What we don't have is corporate media that is relevant in world news. So the source of world news, corporate media, is from Western corporate media.
Exactly.
So it's not because we're not covering African stories enough. Yes, we could do better, but we don't have the level of corporate media that the world is watching. And so if it doesn't appear on Western corporate media, it almost is not relevant. There's that. There's also the part of outright racism. And that's why the lives in Congo and the lives in Sudan, the lives in Nigeria, the lives in Cameroon, with the crisis between Anglophone and Francophone, in Cameroon, don't matter even if it's showing on the biggest media platforms across the world, because of simple racism. And it's the same reason that Ukrainian lives would matter more than Palestinian lives. It's racism. If they show you millions of people who have died in Congo all over CNN, I didn't want to mention these names, or BBC or Sky or MSNBC, it wouldn't get the same reaction, or nobody would really care. And they don't look at those stories and say, we're going to broadcast these stories, for the rest of the week, because it doesn't get the same reaction as there's a crisis in the UK, if there's a crisis in France, or a crisis in Italy, or some of all those places. That, for me, is one of the major reasons, we don't get the same reaction, or it doesn't get the media coverage that it should get. We should do more, but we need to build, to some extent, bigger corporate media platforms here, or independent media platforms here, that actually carry these stories. And then maybe the world just needs to care more about the lives in Africa. I don't know. But important. Anyway, that's enough banter for that. Dashin, thanks for stopping by. We'll see you again at 9.
Okay.
All right. We'll take a short break. When we come back, we're moving into our top stories this Tuesday morning here on Breakfast Central.
Welcome back to Breakfast Central. As the Nigeria Labour Congress and Trade Union Congress commenced the proposed indefinite strike across the country, work activities in parts of Lagos State have been put on hold. At the State Secretariat in Alausa, workers were seen standing at the entrance where they denied access by members of the Labour Union. Our correspondent Bernard Akede visited parts of Lagos to observe compliance with the strike action and files in this report.
Locked gates and empty office premises characterized the Lagos State Government Secretariat in Alausa as the NLC and the TUC officials stood guard, ensuring all staff complied with the proposed industrial action, which commenced on Monday.
The bus from the Nigerian Civil Service Union has been parked in front of this entrance of Alausa Secretariat since about 6:30 this morning, right from when we were coming to work, and it hasn't moved. just to ensure that nobody gets in. We spoke to some of the officials of the National Trade Union Congress who are there in front of the gate, and they said that staff buses did come this morning, but they turned all of them back. Now, just behind you can see, like a queue of people standing there. These are presumably staff of the Lagos State Secretariat, still hanging around, probably hoping that something may happen. But the Trade Union Congress members have said nothing would happen.
Some workers tried to make their way into the office complex, but were turned back.
We are here to monitor compliance to the TUC and NLC strike directive. All government workers, both private and public, must comply with the TUC directive.
The situation was the same at other entrances and exits of the State Secretariat, as well as the State House of Assembly. Locked gates with standby security operatives to prevent a degeneration of the situation. With different sectors officially stating that they will be joining the strike, including the petroleum industry, it was not surprising to see that queues had started building up in some filling stations.
Behind me is a fuel station, a mobile filling station, like some other filling stations within Lagos that we have seen. We're beginning to see queues build up in some of these places. They are selling petrol and other products as usual, but this may be as a result of panic buying, and that's why we're seeing the queues. More often than not, when there's a pending strike action or an ongoing strike action, citizens tend to come out in numbers to buy product from fuel stations, just in case the petroleum sector also gets affected.
Even the health sector wasn't spared. Upon arrival at the Lagos University Teaching Hospital, union members had to go from office to office to ensure workers complied with the directive issued by the national body.
At this juncture, we have no option but to follow the directive of our national body. Our emergency units have been exempted from participating in the strike, So, and I think that's a good one as far as proceeding with this strike is concerned.
The suffering is too much. Why will the federal government, they said round table, the NSC, the TUC, they have been, deliberating on this round table for so long. Enough is enough, please. Enough is enough. For them to know where the truth is pins us. Let them go, let the Senate, the whatever, let them put their salary on this minimum wage too, and let's see what will happen.
Protest. The minimum wage protest clip and the report filed in by Bernard Akedi, that's not something that we've seen in isolation. It's not restricted, or it wasn't restricted to Alausa Secretariat. There were pockets of strikes spread across the country. At the airport, for example, we did get reports that flights were grounded, people were not allowed to fly. There have been reports as well of the national grid being shut down. I don't think that one is any much of a report, as we all could see that we didn't have power. For those of us who don't live in estates, we didn't have power, or serviced estates, I beg your pardon. We didn't have power. We've not had power for over 24 hours now. Yeah. Even though some have argued that the national grid was going to probably collapse anyway, and now Labour is taking credit for it. There have also been those who have criticized the Labour Congress, the organized Labour, for doing this, stating that they cannot believe that organized Labour will shut down hospitals and shut down life because of 60,000 naira. And the reaction to this has been those who would say to these critics that, first of all, this was going to happen anyway, and that when there was national grid collapse, why have Nigerians, or why did they not have this sort of reaction on social media?
Yeah, but the thing is, those are all fake, narratives being brought up, to defend the Nigerian government, or at least to speak down on the NLC. There's no hospital. There's no CMD. There's no doctor. There's no, nobody, that has complained in the last 24 hours that, the light has affected them. Go across, if you look across the stories across the whole country, not one hospital has complained. And for people who actually work in the health sector, you would know that, a shutdown of power nationwide doesn't stop the emergency or essential services in the hospital from working. So these are all just narratives that are being sold to try to defend, rather to speak bad about the NLC's
I can't categorically say that not one hospital has complained, right? I get that you're not being absolute. But let's imagine that hospitals have complained, because I want to imagine that And I want to believe that certainly there are hospitals that will be affected. But that's the essence of a strike action. The essence of a strike action is to sort of pinch where it hurts.
No,
So
but when I say no hospitals complained, you know, the ideas that they are selling is that people who maybe have dialysis, you know, or some really major emergency, and they say, oh, babies in incubators.
So usually when things like this happen, it's why Labour gives notice. Labour gave notice to say, by the 31st of May, if we haven't resolved all of these matters, by 1st of June, we've gone on strike. So it's not like the strike came out of, I mean, this is not me speaking for or against the strike, but to explain that strike doesn't come out of the blues, or this was not a strike that came out of thin air. There were clear demands and expectations that were meant to be met. And Labour was clear about, if you do not meet these demands, or you do not meet this expectation, by the 1st of May, we're shutting down the country.
We're saying pretty much the same thing.
Exactly.
You know,
So
it is being blown, that particular narrative is being blown out of proportion to make people, you know, go against the NLC strike and to call Labour, you know, to, of course, you know, to call off the strike. That's really what it is.
In a way.
And again, I haven't heard of any hospital that has complained that it lost a patient, or it lost a baby, or, you know, had a major crisis, you know, because they didn't have power for 24 hours. So, you know, it is really just being blown, you know,
So we should probably ask and put the question out there, if you're a hospital that has been grossly affected by this, let us know.
Oh yeah, that would be great. Let us know. You know, but, you know, like you mentioned, you know, what is the essence of a protest? What Nigerians always do is try to protest at their convenience, right? Nigerians would say, because we have this thing as a people where we're very, very selfish.
As long as it doesn't affect me and my
as long as it's
family.
not affecting me, you can go ahead and do your own protest. You know, the protest is meant to make my life better, but I also don't want to be inconvenienced by you trying to make my life better. And so that's the mentality that these things come out of. You know, that's why when people say that they're taking strike action or they're protesting, you know, someone said yesterday that for you to protest, for Nigerians, you would have to fight Nigerians themselves and convince them that this is meant to be good for you. It's the same thing that happened during the End SARS protest, where you almost need to then convince police officers that the fight that these people are on for is to make your life better. You need to fight the same Nigerians that you're trying to protest for. And so we live in this bubble where to convince me now to join the protest, I have to, you know, be bothered enough. I need to convince that I need to live this bit of inconvenience, this little luxury that I enjoy. And we're talking about the barest minimum of luxury. You need to convince a Nigerian to let go of that luxury, you know, just so that he can join the protest or understand the reasons behind the protest. And that's why you see these reasons. A lot of people who are putting out these reasons or putting out these narratives or blowing these whole things out of proportion are people who really have the most simple luxury, you know, of life in Lagos or in Abuja or anywhere else. You would never hear the poor man in the street who doesn't know where he's going to find food tomorrow, you know, say this kind of thing that, oh, you know, what if, you know, your hospitals, you know, are having issues because
and I hear you completely. I also don't want to be disconnected from those who may actually have been impacted by the result of the strike.
Absolutely.
I don't want us to be completely disconnected. We must acknowledge the fact that there are people who might have been affected, maybe who had emergencies, last-minute flights to make that unfortunately, could not catch them.
I acknowledge them.
So
also.
Our heart goes out to those who have been grossly impacted by the result of the strike, those who this national grid shutdown has affected grossly, maybe because they have to pay more, you know, because
I haven't had electricity since yesterday.
No,
I've been running my generator
understand.
since yesterday.
Yeah,
I'm
me
just
too.
saying. So everybody has been affected.
So I'm just saying to everyone,
I
don't want us to speak like we're disconnected from the reality of the fact that there are people that will be affected by the strike that happened. But then also to mention that the effect of, or the essence of a strike is to send across a message. And the message that is being sent across oftentimes comes in an uncomfortable manner, to let people know that, because when it's comfortable, the government will make a move. They had, for example, the whole of May, and the back and forth was a lot, right? But then also to say to Labour, even as Labour has now gotten the attention of the federal government, to ensure that they use this attention wisely, to ensure that you don't have to go through these cycles over and over again, because we see that happening in Nigeria.
That's going to happen.
They call off the strike, and then after I'm not saying, and this is not me advocating that, oh, they should elongate the strike. I'm just saying, you have the attention now, maximize the attention as much as you can, so you don't keep taking Nigerians through this toxic roller coaster over and over again. That's one. Another thing would be that I was actually surprised, if I'm being honest, that Labour could have wielded this amount of influence, because Nigerians had in some measure given up, you know, Labour's ability to be able to push and actually shut down the economy? Because they've been calling for strikes for the longest time and never really had a
the reason
back.
is, regardless of what side of the political divide that you are on, regardless of how delusional you try to be, every single person realizes that today's Nigeria is the most difficult that they've ever experienced in the last decade and more. Every single person understands it, you know, and so even those who want to take sides with government and say, oh, Labour is asking for too much or Labour is making things difficult, they also know within their hearts that this is the most difficult times that Nigerians have to deal with. Look at the markets. I saw pictures yesterday where people have, you know, 2 pictures of yam tubers that have been cut into 2 because people can no longer afford a full yam tuber.
Where I usually buy
so
yam, my guy isn't selling yam again. He hasn't had yam in a long while because he can't actually afford it.
Yeah.
So this is a really rough time. It's a tight time and it's a difficult time for Nigerians. Also, just to say to Labour, whilst they're fighting for the minimum wage, there are other plights. It's not just, you know, organized labour. Because we saw earlier, like we did talk about the fuel scarcity. The fuel rate was one of the things they had called for before. Electricity tariff. But like you mentioned, we're not hearing any of that. So they shouldn't totally abandon and throw Nigerians to the curb. Whilst they're fighting for this, they should please remember to talk about other things and bring them to the table.
Yeah, you know, but I'm not expecting, you know, a lot. You know, I don't expect that the federal government will, of course, you know, approve a 400,000 naira minimum wage. You know, we've already spoken about that extensively and how, you know, the government can't afford that. It's not even realistic. A lot of people also don't expect that Labour will get all its demands, you know, but, you know, will there be a little bit of an adjustment here or there? Maybe. You know, the prayer really is that, you know, whatever demands that are being, or whatever agreements are being signed will actually be followed through, you know, by the federal government.
Right.
You know, and
but
so
now
we'll
let's take this
to
social media. Let's take this to X as we wrap up this segment and ask you, whilst there have been different reactions to the strike called by organized labour, would like to ask, what side of the divide are you on? Are you for the strike going on, or are you completely against the strike? Let us know on X at News Central TV. We have our correspondent, Chinwe Ogele, who's joining us to give us updates on the strike and how it's been received. Good morning, Chinwe. Thank you very much for joining us. Where are you and what's the update with the strike?
I am in Umuahia, currently in front of the Workers' Secretariat here in Umuahia. And of course, the offices are still closed. Of course, the main gate is still on the lock and key. I've been to a number of places this morning to get updates, and clearly all the offices, government, public offices were closed, from schools, public schools, to the high court, to the hospitals here in Umuahia. All are under lock and key, and the whole place is just quiet. Banks are still closed. As of yesterday, I understood they were offering skeletal services, though their gates were closed. But then they had lots of customers standing right in front of the banks, waiting to be admitted into the bank. So that's
how much? Yeah, I mean, from what you've seen, how much, you know, inconvenience has the strike brought to people in Abia State? Have there, you know, been people who have maybe even berated the NLC for, you know, for stressing them out? You know, or are there a lot of people in the state that are in support of the NLC?
Well, the situation is such that one of the persons I interviewed yesterday did make a different suggestion. He said that rather than demand for 100,000 naira minimum wage, that the NLC should be advocating for a uniform minimum wage for everybody across board, be you president, governor, senator, House of Assembly member, and even a teacher, that everybody should have the same minimum wage. And not just talk about people having 100,000 naira minimum wage or 60,000 naira minimum wage. And then there's also this group of people who think that it shouldn't just be about workers, that Nigeria's money is not meant for only workers who work in government offices or do white-collar jobs. What is the fate of the trader out there, the man who does the mason work and you know, all those artisans? So when you demand for all these minimum wages, what will be the fate of these other people? How do they get money or get paid from government? So there are lots of ideas and suggestions going out there, and so it's not just that everybody. If you are a civil servant, if you are a worker, of course you will agree with what NLC is doing right now. But then those of them who are not workers think that it is rather too much. Some also said that it is not realizable. The amount of money they are requesting for is something that is like a tall dream, that it's better they go for something that is achievable.
All right. We, of course, we'll be waiting to see how this eventually turns out. We have updates today after the meeting to know whether the strike is ongoing in the different parts of the country. Thank you very much, Chinwe, for joining us this morning to bring updates from Abia. Do stay well.
Thank you.
All right. We're still having conversations about the minimum wage. We'll go on a very quick break, and when we come back, we'll be exploring further conversation. But remember to keep the conversation going on X. And you can tweet at News Central TV, or you can tweet at us individually. We'll be right back after this break. As Nigerians struggle to come to terms with the recent labor strike spreading across cities and businesses, some have taken time to reflect on the heroes and heroines of democracy. The name Alhaja Kudirat Abiola, wife of the acclaimed winner of the June 12, 1993 election, late Chief MKO Abiola, who was assassinated on the 4th of June 1996 by some gunmen in Lagos, will forever be etched in the annals of history as part of those who fought for the democracy we have today.
Now, as a human rights activist and a fighter, her unrelenting contributions back then made it possible for all to see democracy thrive. 28 years later, her memory continues, of course, to linger. Her perseverance continues to stand tall, and her love for freedom from military rule couldn't be overemphasized. Now, one person has taken it as a mandate to drum the support for democracy in Nigeria and Africa. Joining us this morning to look at her legacy, which was left behind by her mother, is the Nigerian human rights, civil rights, and democracy activist, the founder of the Kudirat Initiative for Democracy, KIND, Dr. Hafsat Olaronke Abiola Costello. Good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Morning.
Great to have you. Of course, you know, it's been a really long time. We're talking 28 years of the memory of your mother. Before we get into, talking, of course, about current day Nigeria and, of course, the human rights fight, I want to know your thoughts, concerning the investigation into her death. Has the family moved on? Are there still questions being asked today? Is this a closed case completely?
I think at the Oputa panel, the people who were responsible for her death confessed. So I don't think there's any question about why she was killed, under what instructions she was assassinated, how it was carried out. In terms of justice, no, the case just continues to drag on, and there's not been justice. And, we're talking about a woman that was killed. So there's nothing we can do that will bring her back. It's just that if you have a state that gets away with sending out members of the army to assassinate people, it's not good for the country as a whole, and it's not good for activists. And activists are needed for the country to thrive because they raise alarm, they organize and mobilize whenever things are wrong. So they should not be in danger of their lives while they do that, because many times, even that they do that, if they succeed, the country gets better. So we shouldn't be supporting an environment that makes it hard for people to speak their truth to power. And unfortunately, in my mom's case, there's been no justice, as you say, 28 years later.
Yeah,
wow.
I remember I did, see a few clips of the Oputa panel with Sergeant Rogers, as it was popularly called, confessing to the crime. Of course, said Major Al Mustafa also, was the one who asked him to do it. So it must be really heartbreaking, and I can't even imagine, what you're dealing with. So. If it doesn't matter how many years pass, it's still going to, have the same pain. So my heart, of course, and condolences to you once again.
Absolutely. And now, looking at what we have today in Nigeria's current democratic terrain, how would you rate where we are in the fight or in the advocacy of democracy, rule of law? Would you say, we're in a good space, or would you say that you're not particularly pleased by what we're running?
To be fair, my sister, I feel that we cannot say we're in a good space. We cannot say that. That's the truth. Our people are struggling. Our people are struggling. They are, when my father campaigned in 1993, his campaign manifesto said, "Farewell to poverty." The poverty is still so rampant across Nigeria. The National Labour Congress is on strike. I understand that perhaps they're about to enter into an agreement with the federal government. And many people are questioning the methods by which they've undertaken this strike. But we should note that it's been a year that they've been trying to come to an agreement with the federal government. And the minimum wage is 30,000 naira, about $22. The poorest Nigerians cannot afford to live by that. And even while we say that the country cannot really afford to pay more, we are watching as people in the House of Representatives and Senate award themselves huge sums and for allowances, for all kinds of reasons, while the lowest rung of workers in our country are to subsist on $22 a month. There's a lot that has to change. I think that we focus so much on electioneering and not enough on governance and not enough on delivering economic, social dividends to people in Nigeria. And not just in Nigeria. Dr. Joe Okeodumaki and I put out a press release for June 4, as we generally do every year, where we said, democracy is on trial, not just in Nigeria, but across Africa. If we look at what's happening in West African countries, where in Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, also in Central Africa Republic and Gabon, the coup d'etat recently, it tells us that if this democracy doesn't deliver, we will go back to those dark times of military rule. It's happening around us. So this democracy must deliver, and politicians must focus on doing that.
Yeah. I also want to know, your thoughts on the current administration in Nigeria. Before we get back to talking about your mom, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, of course, celebrated 1 year a few days ago. Maybe we didn't celebrate it, but marked 1 year since inauguration. What are your thoughts, on where Nigeria is 1 year after his inauguration?
Well, so just by way of background, for undergrad, I studied economics, and for graduate school in China, I studied pretty much economics again, but with a focus on Asia, on how they developed. And that's really my interest. I think that what we need President Tinubu to do is to be able to put in place a model for by which a democratic country in Africa can deliver development. I think it hasn't actually been done. We don't have any.
Yeah, there's no model. There's nothing. There's no plan. There wasn't a plan before he got into office, and there's no plan now.
The thing is that we know he's a brilliant strategist. We need his attention focused on delivering a strategy by which the largest populated African country can actually have broad-based prosperity, not the neoliberal economic model that gives us a few rich people, mega rich people, who then we wait for crumbs from. The Nigerian people are too dignified and powerful in and of themselves to have that kind of undignified economic system, and it's an insult to the Nigerian people. That's why they've been, what you call Japa, they've been leaving the country in droves, because they are so talented, they're so hardworking, that if they go into another country with another system, they tend to thrive there. we need to be able to deliver within Nigeria a system by which Nigerians can thrive within Nigeria.
All right. So
And
now,
that work is still going to do. It's not, I know you set up an economic team full of brilliant people. I saw that my sister, Funke Okpeke, is on that team, and she's so brilliant. And there are a lot of good minds. They have to use these resources to deliver. The focus often is the political campaigning. Nobody is interested in that after elections as an average Nigerian. They're interested in what their lived reality looks like. And that needs to be the focus now.
All right. So let's bring the focus now back to your mother. Even as we mark her unfortunate demise, or, many years ago, if your mom was here today, what would you think, would be her core message? What would you think would be the message she'll be trying to drive here in Nigeria, and the impact that you think she would have been making here?
The message she used to share a lot on TV, on radio, in the marches, was to women. And she used to say that we have a task to raise our children, but we also have a task to make sure that the world is ready to receive those children, that the world that the children will enter into reflects the values that you've been teaching them at home. She wanted women not just in the household, but also on the streets. She wanted them in the boardrooms. She wanted them in leadership. We have one of the lowest rates of women's representation in government in Africa. And given the way that women led, financed, we're in co-leadership with men during the June 12th struggle, it's a disappointment. And something needs to be done to change that. And I think my mother's message will be around this, because the studies that have been done show that women invest more in communities. They invest more, when they have disposable income, 90% of it goes to their families and communities, whereas for men, it's 40%. When we look at Africa and we look at Nigeria and we're concerned about the lack of broad-based prosperity, it should be clear that women are an untapped resource that can help us really accelerate development and growth and shared prosperity. We need them in the government, we need them in the corporate suites, we need them everywhere in our society. And when we look at the women in the informal sector, we also have to think about how to support them so they become more successful. The country's future may well depend on this.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you also feel like, the activism that your mom championed back then, do you think that, people who, of course, learn from her have carried the same activism till date? Are you maybe disappointed with, current Nigerian activism, for a better Nigeria?
I think a lot of the politicians went back to politicking. And politics is not an end in and of itself. It's actually a means to an end. The end is that the country should improve. The end is that the people should see the value of being Nigerians. They should feel that they're well taken care of as Nigerians. A lot of our politicians are just looking for how to advance their own political influence, impact, their own power. Their power is not an end in and of itself. We don't care about their power. We care about the lived reality of Nigerian people. And so I think she would be incredibly disappointed and be a hypercritical voice. The activists like Dr. Joe Odemaki and so many others, journalists, they keep fighting, they keep talking, but I feel that until the politicians understand that they're running into a brick wall, when they look at the coup d'etat in other parts of the region, it should be a warning to them that they're running out of time and they need to start to deliver. And once they get this, then they can work together with the activists and the intellectuals to really deliver a working model for Nigeria. We don't have that yet.
All right. Let's talk about, again, the life that your mother lived and her legacy. I recently watched a biopic of Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, which I think was brilliant. And I know that we're starting to tell more stories about people who have impacted our democracy and who have been a part of our journey. And I know that there was also a documentary about your mom, if I'm correct, in 2014, The Supreme Price. I haven't, unfortunately, gotten to see it yet. But would you be open to a fresh biopic being done about her? And if yes, what would you think, or what is a message that you would like for people to remember whenever they see it? Or what feeling would you want that to evoke when people see it?
Thank you for the question. I'm looking forward to watching the biopic on Funmilayo Ransome Kuti that was done by Bolanle Austin Peters.
Brilliant work.
She's incredible. And she's been telling our stories. There are many filmmakers like her. We need to tell our stories. We have incredible stories as Nigerians and as Africans. And the era in which our stories were deleted, erased, where our achievements, even within Kemet in Egypt, what we call Egypt now, and the attempt to make everything as if Black people never achieved anything is so wrong, and it's an attack on our identity, which I think as Nigerians we should be in the forefront of correcting. We need to let the world know that there have been achievements, there have been kingdoms, there was the Songhai kingdom. There's so much of our history that we need to share so that people know that Black history is not just the history of slavery, slave trade, and colonization. But having said that, we'd be more than happy to support the telling of this story of my mom. And I think the key message that I would love for us to take away from her story is how a high school graduate, mother of 7, wife of this larger-than-life figure, was able to craft out for herself a way to make her own contributions to our country. I think all Nigerian women have contributions that they need to make because Nigeria is still unfinished. We need to really put our country in the right position to do well for the 200 million people in Nigeria who are suffering. That's not something we should leave to men alone. Men can contribute a lot. They're doing what they can. But I think the fact that we're still not at the finish line suggests that they need help too. And women can provide critical thinking. They can provide courage where the men sometimes lack that courage. And especially now that the whole world is now looking at climate change, we're now looking at militarism, the global geopolitical fight between East and West. Nigeria has a role to play in Africa to help guide Africa for how Africa emerges through all of those conflicts in a stronger position, because we have 1.4 billion people on the continent of Africa. We've been powering the world's prosperity for centuries, and it's now time that we power our own.
Yeah. Maybe the last question for me this morning, would be, what would justice mean to you? If we go back to those, of course, who owned up, to the murder of your very beautiful mom, what would justice mean to you?
Justice would be the federal government acknowledging its role in what happened to her, and it's not so much, and to put in some penalty on the people that did that, not because of my mom, as I say, she has died, but my concern is that if we allow things like this to be done without any penalty, it's actually a danger for activists in the country always, because other people can be directed to go and commit dastardly acts, and they know that there'll be no penalty for it, and then they will. So we need to protect Nigerian people. And so there should be some kind of penalty. There should be an acknowledgement. But the most important thing, and the thing that breaks my heart the most, is that which they gave their lives for, that both my mom and dad gave their lives for, which is that the Nigerian people should live in a country that has said farewell to poverty. We're still not there. And that will be the best justice, even more than any other thing that I've said today, is that if we could live in a country where Nigerian people are not trying to escape their own country, where they thrive in Nigeria and their incomes are robust and they're able to meet their responsibilities and visit other parts of the world, but be like, look, you have nothing on us. Nigeria is much better than whatever you think you have, and come back home. That would be the best form of justice, because that's really what they fought for.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. My final question would be, everyone knows your mom as Kudirat Abiola, but you know her as mother. What would you say is maybe your fondest memory of her? I think it's important that we end on some form of a sweet note.
My mom's jollof rice. And my mom as a mom was A1 mom. A1 mom. And she had time. She had time not just for her 7 children, but sometimes my father would just turn up with more children. And my mom had time also for them. And she was kind. That's why I called my NGO kind, because I think that currency of kindness, we need more of it. She was giving. And now I'm a mom of 2 gentle children. My son is 17, my daughter is 15. And I just mastered the jollof rice that my mom used to cook. And my son said I had to cook it for their school festival like 2 weeks ago. When I cooked it, the women that were serving it were telling me that people were coming to the stand and saying they want that one. You know, the Belgian people don't know what jollof rice is. They don't know it's jollof rice. They were pointing at my food, like they want that one. And I have a feeling that my mom, where she would just have smiled. She was just, you know, she made being a mom like it was just the best thing in the world. And it made us children feel so cared for, so well loved. When she died, I didn't even doubt for one moment that I had to honor her and carry that legacy just to show how much I appreciated every minute, every second that she dedicated to all of us. And I would love for us to continue to support women as their mothers so that they can really do well by their children, because if we can do well by our children, we really have the opportunity to change the world.
Yeah.
Such a beautiful story you've ended, or you've told us, and such a sweet note you've ended the story on. Thank you for sharing with us. And cheers to you being an amazing mom yourself. You know, in memory and in celebration of your mom, I think I'm going to have jollof rice for lunch today. But I'm sure it's not as nice as yours or as nice as your mom's. Thank you so much for joining us.
Nigeria, please, let's meet so I can cook it for you.
I would love that. Absolutely. I look forward to that. And I look forward to the story of your mom being told, so that generations from now, you know, to come can see the impact that she played in our democracy. Thank you so much for joining us on today's interview.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that's quite a heartwarming interview that we've had there. Bittersweet, I would say. So many stories that need to be told, and we will keep telling them as much as we can. Let's share with you a recap of the conversations we've had this morning on Breakfast Central. This morning, we've talked about the Labour, of course, saying that they may end strike as federal government offers above 60,000 naira. But the current situation is that the strike is still ongoing until they hear from the meeting. Remembering a fighter for democracy 28 years after none other than the Kudirat Abiola herself, presidential aide attributes Labour strike to politics, is what they're saying. But that's not all that we're looking at this morning. Let's share what's coming up next on the show.
This morning, what Nigerians are saying. We'll share with you reactions across social media on major stories across the country. Nigerians also call for a salary review for senators. The newspaper front page is also coming your way in just a few minutes. We'll share with you, of course, the major stories making headlines across Nigeria.
Welcome back to Breakfast Central. We're going to find out what the headlines are saying shortly. We're joined by Ikechukwu Amechi, who's a publisher of the Nation newspaper. Good morning, and thank you very much for joining us.
Always my pleasure, Olive.
All right. Everyone is talking about the NLC strike, and we're going to connect with our correspondent shortly. But just to get an idea of your thoughts about the NLC strike, how has it affected you? Has it affected you personally?
Yes, it has.
How?
I don't have light.
My brother.
Yeah, but I mean, do you see that as a willing sacrifice that you're willing to make for them to?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, let's find out exactly how the strike is being received. We have our correspondent Emmanuel, who joins us to bring updates on the strike, and we'll be bringing that much later. But let's look at the paper, the front page of the Vanguard newspaper. Labour shuts Nigeria as wage talks resume today. At the top of the paper, while we revoked Heritage Bank's license, says CBN, and this happened yesterday, and the license was revoked yesterday. Nama MD wants reversal of 50% IGR deduction in interest of safety. Presidential committee canvasses 1% revenue cost of collection. Government reform shouldn't push Nigerians into poverty, says Ajaero. And that's all that we have on the front page of the newspaper. You can see there the NLC, TLC strike in Lagos. That's a picture of the strikers maybe having a conversation with the Nigerian police. And that's all that we have. Let's take the next paper.
All right, the Daily Independent is next. It says that Labour cuts power, shuts courts, airports, ministries, and schools. Indigenous airline operators lament loss of over 1 billion naira. Labour leaders chase workers away from offices and duty posts. Also will abide by federal government's decision on state police, says the IGP. Federal government and Labour reach agreement on minimum wage. If you follow the stories this morning, they have agreed to more than 60,000 naira. The strike has still not been called off, but there is some agreement that the federal government, seems to have, and Labour, of course, seem to have signed off on last night or yesterday evening. Stakeholders worry over timing of Heritage Bank's license revocation. It seems they had, a very, very insane sum of money in non-performing loans that were hanging over the bank. NLC accuses federal government of intimidation over national grid shutdown. NMA assures of continued service amid Labour's strike. And also Rivers crisis. Tempest over. Now it's time for quality projects delivery, says Sim Fubara, who I didn't get to see when I visited Port Harcourt last week.
I was wondering, where... anyway, let's look at the Punch newspaper.
To my office, but he didn't.
He didn't appear when you called him. Your name doesn't end with Wiki now. Anyway, let's look at the front page of the Punch newspaper. Minimum wage. Federal government offers over 60,000 naira. Labour may end strike. Over 60,000 can be like 60,500 or 61,000. Negotiation panel to meet daily. NLC, TUC, ground schools, banks, power grid. Foreign reserves fall by $1.8 billion in 10 weeks. Water from Benin. Border agency rescues Ogun communities after Punch report. Nigeria UAE face-off settled. Visa issuance begins soon, according to the federal government. This gives me so much joy and in ways I cannot explain. I'm working to improve quality of life, says Tinubu. Heritage Bank. NDIC begins refund. Highest depositors get 5 million naira. CBN, NDIC asks creditors to file claims. Reps urge transparency. When I saw it yesterday, that was the first thing I thought about. People who have money there, who have deposited money, what happens thereafter? IOC is not selling crude to our refinery, says Dangote. All right, that's all that we have on the front page of the Punch newspaper. Let's start with the main conversation. The federal government and organized labor tussle. So I've seen two sides. We have seen two sides of the argument. Those who are in support of organized labor, stating that they are asking for what they are worth, and stating that this is the way to go about striking and hitting where it hurts. Even though some disagree with the over 400,000 requirement. However, there are those who totally have decried Labour's tactics, stating that shutting down the national grid is affecting people. It's not a good look on our country. So I wanted to find out what your thoughts are. So glad you have that look.
Nothing.
I know I'm explaining the both.
No, I
the
totally
argument from the both sides that we have seen. So I'd like to find out what your thoughts are on the negotiation. It's the way that Labour is handling the negotiation, the strike, the shutting down of the national grid, and their ask.
I think Labour has done well so far. Look, this is a struggle. And when you are dealing with governments that are as insensitive as Nigerian governments have proved to be in recent times, there's no other way to go about it. In any case, what was there to do other than to go on strike? That's the only weapon that the organized labor has over the government. Look, I woke up this morning to hear that the federal government has now agreed to pay over 60,000. Of course, that is meaningless. Nobody knows what over 60,000 means. Like you said earlier, it could be 60,500, it could be 61,000. But the truth of the matter is that the federal government knew that the 60,000 they brought to the table was a no-brainer. It couldn't have done anything. Yes, I don't also think that Labour expects anybody, whether the private sector or the public sector, to pay 494,000, which was where they were before yesterday. But this is negotiation, and two people are negotiating. There needs to be a meeting point, a middle ground, where you get to that point and everybody will say, okay, we have something reasonable. Labor leaders can now go back to the workers to say, this is what we have got. And the federal government can say, okay. But for you to insist, started from 45,000 to 50,000 to 60,000 in an economy, such as ours. And you know, I had a very big debate with somebody yesterday who was trying to say the usual cliche, no, all of us are to blame for where Nigeria is today. No, it is not President Tinubu's. I said, how can all of us be blamed for where we are today? I am not the president, for crying out loud. It was Bola Tinubu who sought and got the presidency. And he's the president. And he's enjoying all the perks of office. So it is his responsibility, even if I agree with the fact that Muhammadu Buhari wrecked this country. Literally, he did. But Bola Tinubu told us that he knew what he was going into and that nobody should pity him. So I don't know why those who are crying louder than they believe are out there cutting some slack for him. He should step to the table. And if we must be sincere to ourselves, why we got to this crisis where we are now, our policies that were enunciated by President Bola Tinubu's government, removal of the fuel subsidy, hike in electricity tariff, the interest rate floating of the naira. These are the policies that got us to this sorry pass where we are today. And there is no way President Bola Tinubu will wriggle out of blame. In any case, Olive, we are talking, these guys are being smart by half. Throughout Buhari's government, it was 16 years of PDP, and I agree. Political parties win election. So 16 years of PDP. Now
we're on the way to 16 years of APC as well.
Now people are trying to distance Bola Tinubu from the disastrous 8 years of APC under Muhammadu Buhari. I say no. We've had 9 years of APC.
I mean, he did say that he's coming to build on what President Buhari has done.
Exactly. He is still saying that till tomorrow. When Buhari had his birthday last time, Tinubu praised him to high heavens, said he was the best thing that happened to Nigeria, and that he provided a leadership that cannot be faulted in any way. So why are people trying to distance him and his government from the 8 years of wasted opportunities that Buhari foisted on this nation? No, it cannot happen. So Labour did the right thing. Now there is some sort of agreement. They will go back to the. What I will advise Labour is not to call off this strike based on promises.
Okay.
There must be something on the table, agreed and signed, before they call off the strike. If they call off the strike, hoping and believing that the government will take them somewhere, I can assure you, tomorrow, if they call this strike again for this same issue, Nigerians will throw stones at them.
Yeah, but the thing is, being shared as well.
Yeah, and the thing is, even if there's agreement signed, it's most likely not going to be a thing that can kick off next week. There probably still needs to be budgetary allocation for, an increment of 100,000 naira minimum wage and whatnot. All states also need to come on board, So it very likely would end with signing agreements of, even if it's 100,000 naira, but when is it going to, when is implementation going to start? So I want you to speak on that one, and then, in the same thing, what would the Nigerian government's excuse be, or do you believe the Nigerian government has no reason to say that it cannot pay 100,000 naira minimum wage?
I think they don't have the reason. particularly when you consider what the political leaders are earning. Also, do you know how much a senator earns in a month? Though they have refused to tell us.
Allegedly in tens of millions.
But if you put all of them together, including allowances, it runs into tens of millions. Some are saying up to 29 million every month. Where newspaper allowance, whether they read or not, is about 1.2 million every month. And you are saying that an average Nigerian worker cannot earn 100,000 naira a month, which is less than $80, which is less than $80 if we go by the exchange rate of 1,500 naira. Look, it is unrealistic to say that any Nigerian worker should continue earning 30,000 naira minimum wage or even 60,000 naira minimum wage. Because the truth of the matter is that no honest worker, civil servant, can survive on that kind of poor wage because it cannot be a living wage. So when will it start? I don't know. But an agreement needs to be signed. An agreement needs to be signed that this is what it is, not promise.
Yeah.
There ought to be an agreement. And of course, the president has the liberty of going back to the National Assembly with a supplementary budget. So they can say, okay, this is an agreement. It will start, and of course, part of the agreement is there must be a
commencement date.
Yes, a commencement date, specific. They can say June 1st, they can say July 1st, whatever. But we must know when this new minimum wage must come into effect and how much it is in reality.
Yeah, I asked you earlier, about, how you have also been affected by, the strike. So what are your thoughts, towards those who do not want to be inconvenienced by labor strike? Who, had their flights delayed, who haven't had power since yesterday, and, they're tired.
We're seeing it here on the front page of Daily Independence. It's saying labor cuts power, shuts courts, airports, ministries, schools. So the number, it says, indigenous airline operators lament loss of over 1 billion naira. Labor leaders chase workers away from offices and duty posts, and federal government and labor reach agreement. Anyway, so yeah, that just further buttresses the question he's asked.
There must be a price. There must be a price. If you want your liberty, if you want your freedom, if you want things, struggle is not an easy thing. Look, Otta, in 2012, I was almost killed here because I was coming to work. I was editor of Daily Independent in 2012. I was coming to work, and that was when these same forces today that are in power called out Nigerians to protest the subsidy removal by the government of President Goodluck Jonathan. And I was driving to work in front of the road safety office here in Ojodu. Bloodshot eyes boys who had blocked the road stopped me. I was alone, and they were banging on my car. I had to plead my way out of this. It was only my ID card that showed I was a journalist. That one of them, who was reasonable enough, said, please, allow him to go.
Wow.
So it didn't start today.
Yeah.
It didn't start today. People must suffer some inconvenience if we are going to get it right. Everywhere in the world, people protest when policies of government affect them harshly. If you don't endure the 1, 2, 3 days, even 1 week of inconvenience, you are going to live with a lifetime of this nonsense that are being pushed down our throat by the government.
All right, hold on. Let's speak with Chidi. Good morning, Chidi.
Good morning. Good morning to all our viewers. My take this morning is on this NSA strike. I am pleading with Nigerians to bear whatsoever inconvenience this will lead us to. This is the only way we have to. When you remember when we tried to do NSAS, please, they should reform police and this and this, we know what the message was. If NSC has come up with this strike, and we should not consider that hospital like this, people are complaining, but we should not complain because we are fighting this fight together. The rich man will not come to tell them that they are suffering for this. Yeah, we will suffer for it, but we should let them know also that we are ready. What have we not seen? Somebody cannot buy Gary, common Gary, that before we say common Gary. Gary now, if you have Gary, you are a big man, you are a big woman. So we should stay put and stand with the NSA and see that we hold this strike. Even if it's 1 week, we will not die. I totally agree with the man on studio inside there. I totally agree with him. That when Jonathan was there, we saw how strike every day and every time. But we did not die. So why are we now trying to complain about NSC strike is affecting the hospital? Someone wants to travel. It does not matter. Okay, you want to travel and you cannot buy a ticket. Ticket is very high. Everything is high. What will you use to buy those things when the money is not there? The poor people are suffering. Please, Nigerians should be patient and follow up and join this strike, no matter what it takes. Thank you
very much, Chidi, for joining and sharing your thoughts on that. Okay, we've been talking a lot about labor. Let's move to another story. I would like us to touch on the NDIC one shortly and the Heritage Bank saga. But let's quickly talk about the Nigeria-UAE face-off. Federal government says that it's settled and that visa issuance begins very soon. Is that good news?
I don't know what to believe again. If you remember, this is about the third or the fourth time they are telling us it has been settled. Yeah. When the president made a stopover in Abu Dhabi last time, his spokesman, Ajuri Ngelale, issued a statement saying that everything has been settled and that Emirates Airlines will commence immediately flight back to Nigeria, and then that the visa thing has been lifted. It turned out not to be true. I don't know why government will decide to lie to the citizens brazenly, knowing that this is not, if it's an agreement, it's an agreement between two people, knowing that the
government of the UAE or
Emiratis will come out to say, no, that we didn't sign this agreement, which was what they did. So, until I see, of course, it will be a good thing if relations between the two countries are normalized. Nigerians do a lot of business in UAE, so it will be a good thing. But until we see that agreement being concretized, I don't want to believe whatever the government tells us on this issue.
There's a story on the Punch. If you look at the top left corner of the Punch, it's back to the Mr. President again. It says, I'm working to improve the quality of life. I'm guessing, of the Nigerian people. We spoke with someone this morning who reminded us that the president has an economic team that he set up, when he got into office, with the likes of Tony Lumelu and Funke Okbeke and a couple of other people who were on that team. Let me, if I can quickly remember, Chidi Ajare, Abdul Kadir Aliu, Rashid Sarumi, Aliko Dangote, and a couple of other people on that team. Is this convincing? If you looked at the last 1 year and where we currently are, is anybody still convinced that Mr. President is actually working to improve the quality of life of Nigerians, with, the rest of his team?
He may have good intentions. I don't want to believe that anybody would seek the office of the presidency of his country just to punish the people. But the truth of the matter is that those policies, so far, they have not improved the quality of life of the people. So The intentions may be good, but they are not working.
But he said, I mean, reduce their purchasing power. You remember that statement that he made during the campaign. But and another thing is, there is more people now, and I've heard this, once or twice, people who say that it's not possible that you can go 8 years straight with back-to-back terrible policies that continue to ruin your economy. At some point, someone is going to say it's intentional.
Just to highlight it, I mean, you said reduce purchasing power. I think you meant to say widen tax brackets.
No, the president said reduce your purchasing power. Yeah, he said so.
I've seen that.
You get my point. At some point, someone is going to say it's intentional. You can't just continue to have bad policies. And this is from Buhari's time with Godwin Emefiele. Back to back, there's none of these policies that actually worked, and Nigerians saw an improvement in their quality of life. We're seeing the same thing now with, the CBN governor, with Minister of Finance, and everybody.
Again, I want to give the president the benefit of the doubt that he means well. But the truth of the matter is that there is nothing he has done so far that has contributed in uplifting the standard of living of Nigerians. And that is why when he comes out to tell us that he is working to improve the quality of life, people don't believe him. Because what is on ground does not match the rhetoric he comes out with every day. Every day. There's nothing. Look, you can't tax the people out of existence and claim you are improving the quality of life of the people. And the policies, removal of the fuel subsidy, the hike in electricity tariff, these are things that affect the poor man in every way. So when you say you are doing everything, you are working very, very hard, Nigerians are yet to see what it is you are doing to improve the quality of life. If it is these policies, if the policies you have so far come up with are the things you are doing, I'm sorry to say, no, they don't. And you can see how many businesses have shut down since in the last 1 year. Inflation is at 33 point something percent. Food inflation is 40.1. Those are not the things that will improve the quality of life of the people. The average Nigerian can no longer access routine medicine. Sending your children to school has become a problem. Transportation is, even those, in short, in the last 1 year, the middle class has been completely wiped off the map of Nigeria. For you to do a return distance to perhaps Port Harcourt now, you are going to pay a fare of almost 300,000.
I mean, it's money that you'd have added a little more to go abroad. Well, we need to head out of the newspaper review to go and find out what Nigerians are saying on social media, but it's not looking good for now. We do hope for better days for our country. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on Breakfast Central.
Thank you.
All right. Stay with us. We, of course, have shared with you what our guest, is saying. Same thing with, of course, some callers who joined us. But now let's share with you what a broader spectrum of Nigerians are saying, on trending stories across social media. That comes up right next.
Hello, sir. Please, good morning. Thank you for joining us. We'd like to check your audio. Can you please say something?
Okay, good morning. How are you?
Very well, thank you, sir.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
I'm challenged with the network this morning.
Okay, we're coming to you shortly.
Very well.
Welcome to Breakfast Central. It's important that your voice is heard, which is why we head to X to find what Nigerians are saying about some of the biggest stories. The biggest right now being the ongoing strike by organized labor. Right now, as is, organized labor has said that the strike is still ongoing until they hear from their organs after the meeting with the federal government. But before then, a lot has happened. Life seems to have been put on hold, and Nigerians have been reacting on X. Davos says this is why Nigeria can never move forward. Federal government and NLC agreed on anything above 60K. The senators' budget will still be increased, the poor keep suffering, and the politicians keep enjoying. Where is our own hardship allowance? That was his reaction. Duke of Nigeria says federal government and NLC have signed an agreement. We await to see what happens tomorrow. That's, of course, today. My counsel to NLC is that strike should continue until wages are reviewed. This total strike is the only way to hold the government to account. And this is a perspective that some agree with, while some disagree with. Kemisola Adekunle says both federal government and NLC are a bunch of unserious clowns. Rather than requesting for pay rise, which will eventually have ripple effects on the economy, why not demand massive pay cut of these corrupt political office holders and an effective price control of products and services? We did have a financial expert who said price control is not something that we should push for, but that's a conversation for another day. Raymond says if Edo State and Lagos State are doing 70,000 naira minimum wage, there is no excuse for anything less than 100,000 naira by the federal government. Federal government and NLC from 400K to 60K. No. So these are some of the hashtags they use. But, well, they're certainly not in the support of that. And Mayor of Ozubulu says, moving from 400K to 60K, considering Nigerians' economy, a lot of businesses would fold if the private sectors were to also pay the 400K minimum. Already, the hardship is also being felt by them as a result of the inconsistent policies by the government. It's quite unfortunate that we go to this point. Federal government and NLC and TUC should reach an agreement that will be favorable to both the private sector and the citizens. And that's what Mayor of Ozubulu has to say. And these are some of the reactions for and against the strike. Majority of Nigerians have shown their support for it, and there's some who have kicked against it. Now, as a result of the strike by organized labor, we've seen that the airport was shut down. We've seen that banks were closed and shut down temporarily. Also, the national grid was shut down. Some have said even if this NLC strike wasn't going to happen, was the national grid probably not also going to collapse? Let's see what Nigerians are saying in reaction to the national grid, because some have supported the move for the shutdown of the national grid, saying that Labour needs to pass across a strong message, while others have blatantly criticized it. Demola of Lagos says, electricity workers who already knew the national grid was going to collapse anyway, watching Nigerians blame NLC like we already knew this was going to happen. Maurice Moyen says, Nigerians can't even come together together with NLC in shutting down the country to demand better from government. Talking about why should they cut off national grid? That's what protest is all about. It's an inconvenience, but it drives its point home. The Nigerian politician can't believe their luck. What a people, Maurice Moyen says. And the next one is from Ibrahim Shua. He says, Borno has been without electricity for months. None of you emergency lovers of Nigeria ever wondered how the hospitals there are functioning. Is today you know how hospitals depend on the national grid. Now, this I'm setting is a reaction to another tweet I'm going to read shortly that's talked about the impact of this on the national grid. Mohammed Jamal, white Nigerian, says, I still don't understand how you can shut down the national grid intentionally and keep hospitals without power and get away with it. You see, that's those in support or those who are criticizing the shutdown of the national grid. Sir David Onyemaizu says, imagine spending nearly 9 billion on travel expenses and funding Hajj pilgrimage with billions, then turning around and telling the average Nigerian worker to make sacrifices because Nigeria cannot afford to pay a living wage. Shut down the national grid. Shut down everything, Sir David says. What do you say? Are you in support of the national grid being shut down? We're all feeling the impact. For those who do not live in serviced estates, you probably haven't had power in the past 24 hours. But what say you? Do you think that this is a fight Labour should keep pushing for until they get a final, definite response? Or are they going about it the wrong way? You let us know on X at News Central TV. But this is what Nigerians are saying. As the Nigeria Labour Congress, NLC, continues its nationwide strike, key sectors across Nigeria are experiencing significant disruptions, stiffening the country's already challenging economic conditions. The strike, which commenced in response to ongoing grievances over wages, working conditions, and government policies, has halted operations in various industries, including transportation, healthcare, and education.
Now, during the Trade Union Congress and the NLC strike in 2023, Nigeria experienced significant economic loss. The strike, of course, which was primarily driven by issues related to the removal of fuel subsidies and other economic hardships, led to an estimated daily loss of 13.8 billion naira. Businesses, airports, hospitals, power supply are already affected by the ongoing industrial action. Its negative impact on the economy also is being, and of course, becoming increasingly evident, raising concerns about prolonged instability and the urgent need for resolution. But joining us to discuss the state of the economy amidst the strike is SAN President, Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Emeka Obegolu. Good morning, and thanks for joining us.
Yes, good morning.
All right. Let's quickly just get your thoughts on, the strike action. Activities were halted at airports across the country, Port Harcourt, Abuja, Lagos, and of course the national grid has been shut down. There's no electricity across the country. The spokesperson of the TUC said, or the transmission company rather, said it was done by the NLC and the TUC. What are your thoughts on the effect of the strike so far, the industrial action in the last 24 to 48 hours? Has it been damning across the country? Do you think that it is worth it?
Well, I think everybody, the labor, the government, the organized private sector understands clearly the cost of strike. It's a cost that is almost unquantifiable. The economy has been shut down. I was supposed to be traveling out of the country this morning, but because of the uncertainty of the aviation sector strike, I had to shelve my plans and remain on ground to do other things. But this is a very avoidable scenario. The Minimum Wage Act expired sometime this year. Minimum Wage Act of 2019. These negotiations should have started way before now. Unfortunately, we have delayed it up to now, and everybody is victimized for it. Today, across the country, the national grid is shut down. Even the workers who are supposed to stay at home cannot stay at home because there's no power to stay at home. So it's unfortunate that we are here today. But the good news is that government has shown that they can work together with labor. And that sign is manifest in the agreement signed yesterday that both parties can work together to try to resolve this as quickly as possible. So we look forward to a quick resolution of this impasse to allow government to resume work, to allow the private sector to resume. We all understand clearly that there is need to increase the minimum wage. We all understand clearly the challenges, the cost of goods and services in the country today. So undisputably, the labor is right in its agitation to have a living wage. What government needs to do is to come to labor with good faith negotiation so that both parties can agree on this. And for us in the private sector, we are obligated to pay the minimum wage as prescribed by the law.
What is an agreement by government that you think would be suitable? They've, of course, from the agreements yesterday, they're talking about, above 60,000. Nobody knows exactly what that means. But what is an agreement that you think, would make some sense, and Labour maybe should, work towards?
Unfortunately, I am unable to hear you now.
Well, I'm asking, what is a figure that you think would make some sense that Labour should maybe work towards, as they try to get an agreement with the government?
Well, if you want a figure that will make some sense, it may be impracticable to pay it. We all live in Nigeria. We know the cost of living in Nigeria. If you want a figure that will make living sense, you should be looking at least minimum of about 200 to 250,000 naira. But again, Labour is part of government. They know the finances of government. So we must work with a realistic figure that the government can pay. Now, both parties are interested in a sustainable government bureaucracy. That is where their interests meet. So because they know that unless the government pays what it can sustainably retain and pay over the next 5 years, there will be no need to agree on 500,000 naira as minimum wage, even though it sounds realistic, but the government cannot pay it. So that is where good faith negotiation comes in. The government has to open their books to show Labour what they can pay in a sustainable manner. And if that is done, I think Labour can be reasonable to accept that which reflects the paying power of government. Government will not borrow money to pay wages.
Should they possibly consider the senators, the National Assembly, because that's what a lot of Nigerians have been clamoring for, saying that they should probably review their salaries. We're not quite sure how much they earn in the first place, but there have been rumors that it's amounted to tens of millions. So do you think that maybe this is an aspect that they can look at to show that the government on its own end is particular about cutting costs, not that the people alone have to bear the brunt of the issues with the inflation?
I think if we begin to compare political office holders with civil servants, we may miss the point. We may not be comparing apples with apples and oranges with oranges. What works is to use the comparative advantage of economies such as ours. What do they pay their political of appointees or elected officers? And what do they pay their civil servants? Now, if we get those bases for comparison, we can now begin to compare. I do not think that it would be fair to compare what political office appointees earn. Even as I believe that their earnings is outrageous, I have that belief. But it shouldn't be used to benchmark what Labour should demand. The two are not related. Let us deal with Labour and pay Labour a living wage.
All right.
Yeah. And then we'll go back to the political office holders and then look at it and know whether we can, as a country, continue to pay them what we are paying them. And if we agree that we shouldn't, and I think so, then we can revisit their own issue. So I think we should leave the issue streamlined. Let's deal with Labour for now. And if Labour insists, after getting their deserved wages, they can also challenge the payments to political office holders. And we'll begin to look at that. Yep. It is not sustainable, in my view, but that is for another day. What we have on board today is minimum wage. And if we deal with it without mixing issues up, we may get some traction.
All right. We thank you very much, the President, Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Emeka Obegolu. Thanks for your time this morning. We, of course, will see how developments, how things develop today with Labour and the federal government. and with, of course, the Nigerian populace. We'll look forward to speaking with you again. Thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
All right, and this is where we will be wrapping up conversations this morning on Breakfast Central. Thank you very much for joining us. Remember to tweet at us on News Central TV if you have stories to share with us, breaking news stories, around your locality to share with us. We'll be back here again tomorrow morning on Breakfast Central. I am Osaugie Ogbon.
And I am Olive Emodi, and we'll see you tomorrow.